They gathered us before dawn, when the light was still only a pale smear crawling along the horizon, when even the air seemed too lazy to wake from sleep. The sky over the motor pool was the color of old parchment, smoke-marbled. The ground under our boots was slick with oil and whatever had spilled and been sanctified. Machine blood, they called it. We stood in ranks between the hulking shapes of armored beasts that would carry us to glory, or drag us down into hell. Most of us already knew which side we belonged to. The air was thick with burnt incense and ozone, with holy oils the tech priests had been pouring over the tanks all night, working as they whispered prayers in a binary tongue we could not understand. The aftertaste of those chants still clung to the metal, vibrating faintly like a prayer overheard and never finished. Our sergeant, a man with more scar than skin, barked at us to stand still. His augmetic eye glowed dimly, catching the weak dawn and throwing it back like a heretic's lamp. "Kneel," he said. "You do not kneel before flesh. You kneel before the throne." And we obeyed. The ground bit with cold, seeping through the thin fabric of our fatigues. Ahead of us sat a dozen tanks, sanctified blocks of iron, their hulls carved with the double-headed eagle, carved with prayers and blessings in machine script. I remembered the one that would be ours. Squat, brutal, an engine of faith and fury. Its armor was pitted, rust-layered like scabbed scales on skin. Along its flank ran the names of those who had died inside it. So many. Some letters had been worn smooth by time. A tech priest approached, his robe trailing like cable scrape over stone. His face was a patchwork of meat and brass. His mouth was a wide slit. Every syllable vented steam like exhaust. In a mechanical hand, he held a sensor device that breathed out fragrant smoke. Myrrh, perhaps, or ash from something that had once been called holy. He began the linking litany. His voice was a metallic eulogy. Steel is your flesh, oil is your blood, faith is the spark, fury is the fuel. Know that your soul no longer belongs to you. It is grafted into the engine of his will. As he spoke, the sergeant passed down the line oath slates, thin metal plaques etched with the Emperor's symbol. We pressed our thumbs to the symbols, and blood welled up, drawn out by the sharp edge of the slate. Blood was the seal. Obedience was the life. When my turn came, I hesitated for exactly one breath. The oath slate was warm, almost pulsing. I pressed my thumb down until it stung, and watched a dark red bead spread across the sign. The tech priest's gaze caught me, his lenses pausing, tightening. "Blessed be the offering," he hissed, teeth gears grinding. "The machine drinks and remembers." They said the Emperor himself watched as we swore. I didn't believe it then. I still don't. But I remember the moment the light broke on the tank's hull into shards of gold, and the smoke curled up like a soul ascending. For a heartbeat, I almost felt something sacred in the air. Almost. Then steel touched back. The sergeant signaled each of us forward to lay a hand on the beast that would be our home. I stepped up and felt the machine tremble beneath its metal skin, an inner rhythm, slow as a pulse. The air around it was warmer, as if it lived. I set my palm on the double-headed eagle carved into the flank. The metal was cold at first, then warmed as though the tank drew heat from my hand. The carved edge was sharp, biting into my skin. I traced the eagle with my fingertips, feeling grooves, patches, layers of paint and sealant wax stacked over its history. The surface vibrated faintly. Not wind, but something deep within, like a heart strangled behind thick armor. "I name you Penance," the sergeant said, his voice carrying across the yard. "All who enter you will pay." A murmur of assent rolled through the crew. I tasted rust on my tongue. The tech priest extended a meshendrite and drew a line of holy oil across the tank's prow. "She is bound," he intoned. "Spirit and crew, one in servitude. May the machine spirit be merciful." It was the first time I heard the words machine spirit spoken as if it were alive, conscious. Later I learned it was less than that, and far, far more. The rites finished, they made us repeat the oath of steel. Long, throat-heavy words. Most of us didn't understand them, but everyone understood what lived underneath. Obedience, sacrifice, silence. I am flesh to feed the furnace. I am breath to stir the piston. I am faith to ignite the engine. My life is bound to this hull. My death is bound to its glory. Through steel, I endure. Through fire, I am redeemed. When the last word left my mouth, I felt something close over me like a coffin lid. Waiting. Invisible. Absolute. In that moment, I stopped being a man. I became a part. That night we celebrated with what they called rations. Grain bricks softened with reclaimed water and a thin smear of nutrient powder that tasted of copper and incense. The sergeant issued each of us half a marsek, a rare generosity. We drank in silence under the tank's shadow, like penitents kneeling beneath a relic. Our driver, Karen, was built broad as a forge hand, with the eyes of someone who'd accepted death a long time ago. He ran his hand along the track links, searching for flaws. "She's old," he said quietly. "Older than the regiment. Older than your faith," Soth, our gunner, muttered, then spat on the ground. "If the wind's right, you can hear her hum, like she's dreaming." Rill, our loader, let out a rasping laugh. "Dreaming what? Blood or glory?" Soth shrugged. "Same thing." I said nothing. I listened to cooling metal crackle, to the wind's low moan slipping through exhaust grills. Somewhere deep in the hull, something went tick, like a gear shifting itself. "She's hungry," Karen said, almost reverent. The sergeant's shadow fell over us. "Then feed her properly," he said. "Tomorrow she drinks the sun." That night I didn't sleep. The barracks reeked of sweat and oil. Holy incense clung to everything like guilt. The walls were thin, and through them I heard the distant clicking of tech priests working through the dark, chanting as they anointed every gear and piston. It made me think of insects crawling inside metal bones. When I finally shut my eyes, I dreamed the tank was not a machine, but a living thing. Its hull was flesh. Its heart was an engine beating with molten blood. I stood inside it as if buried, and it whispered in a voice like sand sliding, "Serve and be forgotten." I jolted awake with iron on my tongue. At dawn, the siren hauled us back to the yard. The light was harsher now, slicing through smoke like a knife. The tech priest was gone, replaced by assistants who moved like ghosts between the rows of machines. The sergeant stood before us, his face carved from stone. "Penance crew, mount up." The hatch opened with a hiss of pneumatics. I smelled the inside before I saw it. Hot metal, burnt oil, and the old breath of crews dead for a long time. The stink was thick, choking. One by one we climbed in. The moment I crossed the threshold, the outside world vanished, replaced by the amber glow of lumen strips. The air was heavy, sealed. My own breathing echoed off the walls. Those walls were crowded with carvings, ward stamps, scraps of scripture scratched into armor plating. Someone had gouged words right where the loader sat. "Steel remembers." Karen took the driver's seat, both hands finding the controls like a priest touching a relic. Soth folded into the sighting cradle, whispering a short prayer. Real stowed rounds, each shell bearing a purging seal. I slid into my place by the Vox console, where static whispered constantly, like a voice just beyond the edge of hearing. The sergeant climbed in last, twisted the lock, and slammed the hatch shut with a heavy turn. The sound boomed like a tomb lid dropping. That was when I understood what he meant by buried in steel, and somehow blessed. The air was thin, the lights dim, the metal warm around us. It felt like being swallowed by something enormous and patient. The sergeant's voice came over the intercom, calm and absolute. "Remember your vow. The Emperor sees through iron eyes. There is no fear in steel. We answered together. There is no fear in steel. But I felt it there, under the engine's rhythm. Beneath the oil and the sanctification, the steel had its own hunger, its own pulse, and somewhere deep down I knew that by the end of the campaign, it would drink. They sealed us in the tank as soon as the sun fully rose. The hatch clanged shut, the sound hitting my ribs like a hammer. The air changed at once, thicker, recycled, laced with oil, and a faint sweetness from incense burned to plate the machine spirit. The smell of devotion and confinement braided into one. The outside world disappeared, replaced by an iron womb. The tank's lumen lights cast a muddy amber, turning the compartment into warped halos. Fine dust hung motionless in the stale air, floating between us like prayers that would never reach the Emperor. I felt the hull pressing in from every side. There was no real room to move, only narrow spaces shaped around function. Karen hunched at the controls, shoulders brushing the wall. Soth leaned into the gun sight, his eye pressed to the scope as if it belonged to him. Rill curled beside the loading rack, his hand resting on the casing of the nearest shell as if taking comfort from its cold promise. I sat at the Vox station, my job to commune with unseen voices that ruled my life. Static hissed through the speaker grills, a restless sigh, keeping time with the engine's low, idle rumble. For the first hour, nobody spoke. The sergeant forbade chatter. Silence was the armored crew's first discipline. He said words were too many sparks, and something would burn that should never have caught. So instead, we listened. The cooling system's heartbeat, the suspension grinding under the hull, condensation dripping somewhere in pipes we couldn't see. The machine breathed around us. A deep, mechanical breath. Sometimes the hull went thunk, like bones settling into place. Soth broke the silence first. "You hear that?" Karen grunted. "Hear what?" "That sound like—" Soth stopped and listened. "Like it's whispering." "That's the circulation fan," Rill said, half bored, half mocking. "You want quiet? Go outside and die. It's quieter out there." Soth gave a dry laugh. "Maybe I'll take that offer one day." The sergeant didn't bother to scold. He was staring at the cogitator shrine welded near the turret pillar, a small brass and steel alcove sealed with purging wax, a couple of votive candles, and a relief icon of the Emperor hanging loose. The surface was blackened by years of soot. Above it, someone long ago had stenciled words in block letters. "Serve until rust," the sergeant murmured a blessing. "By oil and fire, by faith and flesh." His gloved hand touched the icon quick as breathing. Every tank had an altar, and every crew learned fast that neglecting it invited misfortune. The machine spirit was hot-tempered, easily angered. Forget to burn incense before ignition and the engine could stall. Skip the movement prayer and a gear could seize mid-battle. Stories went around. Tanks that swung their turrets and fired back into their own crew because they'd been insulted. I didn't believe it then, but the longer I lived in here, the more I felt a presence behind the ritual. Not holy, but watching, as if the tank knew. Time inside the hull went soft, dreamlike. With no natural light, the sense of hours dissolved. We measured life by engine cycles, fuel levels, and slow breaths. Karen muttered while he adjusted the levers. His hands steady, his lips never still, repeating scraps of driver's litany. "Bless the piston, bless the tracks. May the road open in obedience beneath me." The sound became a mantra, blending into the power unit's hum. By midday, the heat began to rise. The vents pushed out air that smelled of machinery and recycled sweat. Every breath grew heavier, as if the tank was breathing into our lungs instead of the other way around. The metal under my palms was warm, almost alive. "Feels like she's sweating," Rill muttered, wiping his brow. "She's just getting used to you," Karen replied, a brief smile. Soth snorted. "You think she likes us?" The sergeant cut in, cold. She will like what the Emperor commands her to like. Show devotion, and she serves. Doubt, and she makes you pay. We fell silent again. Somewhere deep inside, the cooling system kicked up with a low growl, vibration traveling through the floor and up my spine. My teeth ached from the resonance. That night, or what counted as night, we ate rations. Cold protein paste squeezed from a tube, swallowed with water that tasted like metal. We ate in shifts, so someone was always watching the systems. The sergeant said the machine spirit hated an inattentive crew. As I chewed, I watched a flickering gauge. A needle trembled just below the red. "Driver, coolant pressure high." Karen glanced over, frowning. "It shouldn't be. We haven't pushed her." The sergeant leaned in, checked the valve. "Pray harder." Karen nodded and whispered another segment of litany. Slowly, the needle steadied, as if soothed by faith. That was when I began to understand what it meant to live in a tank. Not just walls, heat, recycled air. But realizing the machine had moods, and survival depended on keeping it pleased. The first time we ran a full systems test, the roar nearly deafened me. The engine caught with a violent shudder that shook the hull. The sound was like a living creature, one continuous scream of power and rage, drowning thought. "Saints preserve us," Rill muttered. "She's angry." "Not angry," Karen said. Awake, we began the ignition rite, each of us reciting our part in turn. By the spark of the Omnissiah, awaken. By the will of the Emperor, obey. By the faith of the crew, endure. The sergeant's voice carried over the roar. Steel is truth, flesh is weakness, obedience is survival. When the last words fell, the scream settled into a deep, steady beat. The lights brightened. I felt the tracks bite underfoot. Vibration running from the soles of my boots into my bones. We started to move. The first motion was always the strangest, like being born into movement. After hours of stillness, the walls seemed to shift, the floor to cant slightly as the suspension adjusted. I gripped the Vox handhold to keep my balance. "Hold the throttle steady," the sergeant said. Karen answered with a growl. "Hold it steady." The machine crawled forward, tracks grinding over the ferrocrete of the motor pool. The sound was overwhelming, the vibration unending. Dust drifted from the ceiling in lazy spirals. We rolled on for what felt like hours, maybe less. The only view outside came through the commander's periscope, a narrow slit of warped light. Everything else was metal, darkness, heat. Soth called out firing parameters at random for practice. The gears elevating and traversing clacked in a steady rhythm, hypnotic. I caught myself mouthing prayers without noticing, words spilling out as naturally as breath. The tank had a way of pulling prayer from your mouth, as if it demanded proof in the language of faith. Later, when the machine cooled and the hum faded, we sat in the dimness listening to the Vox crackle. Sometimes the static knitted itself into shapes of sound. Half a voice, a whisper. Once I thought I heard a sentence buried in it. "Can you hear us?" I went rigid. "Who's on the line?" the sergeant asked. "No one, sir," I answered too quickly. "Just noise." He held my gaze a long moment, weighing me. "Don't let ghosts talk to you, soldier. That's how men go mad in steel." "Yes, sir," but I still heard it. A thin after-echo, like breath through cracked glass. By the third day, the air filters had taken on a sour stink of sweat and oil. The sergeant rationed incense, burning only a pinch before ignition. Smoke curled through the cramped compartment and clung to our uniforms, mixing with grease. Every surface turned slick, moisture from our breathing condensing on cold metal, then running down in thin, oily lines. Sleep came in fragments. I nodded off, sitting upright, my head tapping softly against the Vox housing. Dreams bled into waking until I couldn't tell them apart. In half-sleep, I heard the tank murmuring, soft metallic breaths. From the crack of rivets and the pulse of cooling lines, words seemed to form. It didn't speak like a person. It spoke like a storm trapped behind walls. Once, during a long wait, Soth started tapping his fingers on the gun assembly in time with the engine. The sound resonated oddly. "Stop!" the sergeant snapped. Soth froze. "Why?" "It doesn't like rhythm unless it's its own," the sergeant said. "You'll throw it off." We went dead quiet. And in that moment, I understood completely. The machine was not simply something we controlled. It was a god in its own way, a deity imprisoned in iron and oil. And we were its priests, trapped in its belly, feeding it with prayers and sweat. By the end of the first week, we spoke less and less. Language became unnecessary. We learned to communicate with gestures, nods, glances. Every movement was economical. Every breath felt rationed. Sometimes I imagined my heart sinking down to match itself to the engine's beat. And at night, when the lights dimmed and the hull cooled, I sat by the shrine, whispering to the Emperor's icon. But I was no longer certain which god I was praying to, the one on the throne, or the one made of steel, holding me tight all around. They gathered us before dawn, when the light was only a pale smear crawling along the horizon, when even the air still felt lazy, unwilling to wake from sleep. The sky above the motor pool looked like old parchment, stained with smoke veins. The ground beneath our boots was slick with oil and a spilled substance that had been sanctified. Machine blood, they called it. We stood in ranks between the hulking shapes of the armored beasts that would carry us to glory or drag us down to hell. Most of us already knew which side we belonged to. The air was thick with burning incense and ozone, and with the stink of holy oil the tech priests had poured over the tanks all night, working as they whispered prayers in a binary tongue we could not understand. The aftertaste of those chants clung to the metal, vibrating faintly, like the last note of a prayer cut off halfway. Our sergeant, a man with more scar than skin, barked at us to stand still. His augmetic eye glowed dimly, throwing back the weak dawn like a lantern held by a heretic. "Kneel," he said. "You are not kneeling to flesh. You are kneeling to the throne." And we obeyed. The ground was cold enough to bite through the thin cloth of our fatigues. Ahead of us sat a dozen tanks, iron masses made holy, their hulls carved with the two-headed eagle, carved with blessings and prayers in machine script. I remembered the one that would be ours. Squat, brutal, an engine built from faith and rage. Its armor was pitted, its rust layered like scabbed scales. Along its flank ran the names of men who had died inside it. So many. Some letters had been worn smooth by time. A tech priest approached, his robe dragging like cables scraping stone. His face was a patchwork of flesh and brass. His mouth was a wide slit. Every syllable hissed steam like an exhaust pipe. In a mechanical hand, he carried a censer that exhaled fragrant smoke. Myrrh, perhaps, or ash from something that had once been called sacred. He began the litany of connection. His voice was a metal eulogy. "Steel is your flesh, oil is your blood, faith is ignition, wrath is fuel. Know this. Your soul is no longer yours. It is grafted to the engine of his will." As he spoke, the sergeant passed down the line the oath plates, thin metal slats etched with the Emperor's symbol. We pressed our thumbs onto the sigils, and blood welled up, drawn by the sharpened edge. Blood was the seal. Obedience was life. When it came to me, I hesitated for one breath. The oath plate was warm, almost as if it had a pulse. I pressed my thumb down until pain bloomed and watched a dark red bead spread over the mark. The tech priest's lenses caught me, stilled, then tightened focus. "Blessed is the offering," he rasped, gears grinding in his throat. "The machine drinks and remembers. They told us the Emperor himself watched when we swore." I didn't believe it then, and I still don't. But I remember the moment the light broke across the tank's hull into shards of gold, and the smoke curled upward like a soul rising. For a heartbeat, I almost felt something holy in the air. Almost. Then steel met skin. The sergeant signaled us forward, one by one, to lay a hand on the beast that would be our home. I stepped up and felt it shudder beneath the metal skin, a slow inner rhythm, like a pulse. The air around it was warmer, as if it were alive. I set my palm against the two-headed eagle carved into the side. The metal was cold at first, then warmed, as if the tank were drinking heat from my hand. The carved edges were sharp enough to bite. I traced the eagle with my fingertips, feeling grooves, patches, layers of paint and blessed sealing wax over the weight of its history. The surface trembled, too steady to be wind. It came from deep within, like a heart strangled by armor. "I name you Penance," the sergeant said, voice carrying across the yard. "All who enter you will pay." A low murmur of assent rolled through the crew. Rust coated my tongue. The tech priest extended a mechadendrite and smeared a line of holy oil across the prow. "She is bound," he intoned. "Machine spirit and crew, one in servitude. May the machine spirit be merciful." That was the first time I heard machine spirit spoken like it was alive, aware. Later I learned the truth. It was less than that, and far more. When the rite ended, they made us repeat the oath of steel. Long, archaic, heavy on the throat. Most of it no one understood, but everyone understood what it meant. Obedience, sacrifice, silence. I am flesh to feed the furnace. I am breath to stir the pistons. I am faith to spark the engine. My life is bound to this hull. My death is bound to its glory. Through steel I endure. Through fire I am redeemed. When the last word left my mouth, I felt something close around me like a coffin lid, waiting, unseen but absolute. In that moment, I stopped being a person. I became a component. That night we celebrated with what they called rations. Grain bricks softened in recycled water, topped with a thin spread of nutrient powder that tasted like copper and incense. The sergeant issued each of us half a musk, rare generosity. We drank in silence in the tank's shadow, like penitents kneeling beneath a relic. Our driver, Karen, was built like a forge worker, with the eyes of someone who'd made peace with death long ago. He ran his hands along the track links, hunting flaws. "She's old," he said softly. "Older than the regiment. Older than your faith." Soth, the gunner, muttered, spitting onto the ground. "When the wind's right, you can hear her humming, like she's dreaming." Rill, the loader, laughed, rough and dry. "Dreaming of what? Blood or glory?" Soth shrugged. "Same thing." I said nothing. I listened to cooling metal ticking, to the low moan of wind threading through exhaust gaps. Somewhere deep in the hull, something went tch, like a gear shifting itself. "She's hungry," Karen said, almost reverent. The sergeant's shadow fell over us. "Then feed her properly," he said. "Tomorrow she drinks sunlight." That night I didn't sleep. The barracks stank of sweat and oil, incense clinging to everything like guilt. The walls were thin, and through them I could hear distant clicking. Tech priests working all night, chanting while they anointed every gear and piston. The sound made me think of insects crawling in metal bones. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed the tank wasn't a machine. Its hull was flesh. Its heart was an engine pounding molten blood. I stood inside it like someone buried alive, and it whispered in a sand-sliding voice, "Serve and be forgotten." I jolted awake with iron on my tongue. At dawn, the siren hauled us back to the yard. The light was harsher now, slicing the smoke like a knife. The tech priest was gone, replaced by acolytes moving like ghosts between rows of machines. The sergeant stood before us, face carved from stone. "Penance crew, mount up." The hatch opened with a hiss of pneumatics. I smelled the inside before I even climbed in. Hot metal, burned oil, and the old breath of crews who died in there long ago. It was a thick, smothering stench. We climbed in one at a time. The outside light vanished the instant we crossed the threshold, replaced by amber lumen strips. The air was heavy, sealed. My own breathing bounced off the walls covered in etched prayers, warding stamps, scraps of scripture embedded in armor. Someone had scratched a message beside the loader's station. "Steele remembers." Karen sank into the driver's seat, fingers moving over controls like a priest touching a sacred relic. Soth took the sights, murmuring a short prayer. Rill stacked shells, each one sealed with purification wax. I slid into position beside the Vox console, where static whispered constantly like a voice just beyond hearing. The sergeant climbed in last and locked the hatch with a heavy twist. The sound echoed like a tomb lid. That was when I understood what he meant by buried in steel, and what he called blessed. Thin air, dim light, warm metal pressing from all sides. It felt like being swallowed by something vast and patient. The sergeant's voice came through the intercom, calm and absolute. "Remember the oath. The Emperor looks through iron eyes. There is no fear in steel." We answered together, "There is no fear in steel." But I could feel it there, under the engine's pulse. Beneath oil and sanctification, steel had its own hunger, its own rhythm, and somewhere deep down I knew that before this campaign ended, it would drink. They sealed us inside as soon as the morning truly arrived. The hatch slammed shut. Clang, like it struck my ribs. The air changed at once. Thicker, recycled, faintly oily, and sweet with the incense burned to plate the machine spirit. Devotion and imprisonment mixed into a single breath. The outside world vanished. In its place, a womb of iron. The interior lights cast dull amber, bending the compartment into warped rings of glow. Dust motes drifted in the still air, hanging between us like prayers that would never reach the Emperor. The hull pressed close from every side. There was no room to move, only narrow spaces that shaped you into your function. Karen hunched at the controls, shoulders brushing the wall. Soth leaned into the gun sights, his eye already belonging to the glass. Rill folded beside the loading rack, palm resting on the nearest shell like comfort drawn from its cold promise. I sat at Vox, tasked with communion with the unseen voices that ruled my life. Static sighed through the speaker grill, restless, anxious, beating time with the low idle of the engine. For the first hour, nobody spoke. The sergeant forbade chatter. Silence was the first discipline of armored crews. He said speech was like throwing too many sparks, and something would catch that shouldn't. So we listened instead. The breathing rhythm of the cooling system, suspension grinding beneath the belly, condensate dripping somewhere inside unseen pipes. The machine breathed around us, one deep mechanical lung. Sometimes the hull gave a sharp thunk, as if bones were settling. Soth broke the silence first. "Do you hear it?" Karen grunted. "Hear what?" "That sound like..." He paused, listening. "Like it's whispering." "That's the air circulation fan," Rill said, half bored, half mocking. "Want real quiet? Step outside and die. It's quieter out there." Soth gave a dry laugh. "Maybe I'll take you up on that someday." The sergeant didn't bother scolding. He was staring at the cogitator shrine welded near the turret post. A little alcove of brass and steel, sealed with purification stamps, dotted with votive candles, and a raised emperor's emblem hanging loose. Its surface was blackened by years of smoke. Above it, someone long ago had stenciled words in rigid block letters. "Serve until rust," the sergeant murmured a blessing. "By oil and fire, by faith and flesh." His gloved fingers tapped the emblem like a reflex. Every tank had an altar, and every crew learned quickly that neglecting it was an invitation to disaster. The machine spirit was temperamental, quick to anger. Forget incense before ignition, and the engine might refuse. Skip the motion prayer, and gears might seize mid-fight. Stories said some tanks had swung their guns back on their own crews when they were blasphemed. I didn't believe it, at first. But the longer I lived in that iron belly, the more I felt a presence behind the rites. Not holy, watching, as if the tank knew. Time inside the hole became a smear. Without sunlight, hours lost meaning. We measured life in engine cycles, fuel levels, and slow breathing. Karen murmured as he adjusted the levers, hands steady, lips never still, repeating fragments of the driver's litany. Blessed be the pistons, blessed be the tracks. May the road open in obedience beneath me. Sound became mantra, woven into the hum of the power unit. By midday, heat climbed. Vents pushed out air thick with machine stink and recycled sweat. Every breath weighed more, as if the tank were breathing into our lungs instead of the other way around. The metal under my hand was warm, almost alive. Feels like it's sweating, Rill muttered, wiping his brow. It's just getting used to you, Karen answered with the ghost of a smile. Soth snorted. You think it likes us? The sergeant cut in, cold. It will like what the Emperor orders it to like. Show devotion, it serves. Doubt it, and it makes you pay. We fell silent again. Somewhere deep inside, the cooling system kicked on with a low growl that shivered up through the floor and into my spine. My teeth ached from the resonance. That night, or what passed for night, we ate cold protein paste squeezed from tubes, swallowed with water that tasted of metal. We ate in shifts, so someone always watched the systems. The sergeant said the machine spirit hated a careless crew. As I chewed, I watched a needle trembling on a flickering gauge, jittering just below the red. Driver, I said. Coolant pressure's high. Karen glanced, frowning. Shouldn't be. We haven't even pushed her. The sergeant leaned in, checked a valve. Pray harder. Karen nodded, whispering an extra verse. Slowly the needle settled as if soothed by belief. That was when I began to understand what living in truly meant. Not just the walls, the heat, the recycled air, but the fact that the tank had moods, and survival depended on keeping it pleased. The first full system test nearly deafened me. The engine caught with a violent shudder that shook the entire hull. The noise wasn't just noise, it was a continuous scream of power and wrath, swallowing thought. Saints preserve us, Rill muttered. It's angry. Not angry, Karen said. Awake. We began the start-up rite, each of us speaking our lines in turn. By the spark of the Omnissiah, awaken. By the will of the Emperor, obey. By the faith of the crew, endure. Over the roar, the sergeant's voice rang. Steel is truth. Flesh is weakness. Obedience is survival. When the last line ended, the scream settled into a deep, steady rhythm. The lights brightened. I felt the tracks bite beneath my boots, vibration rising through bone. We moved. The first movement was always the strangest, like being born into motion. After hours of stillness, the walls seemed to shift and the floor tilted as suspension adjusted itself. I grabbed the Vox handle for balance. Steady throttle, the sergeant said. Karen answered with a grunt. Steady throttle. The machine crawled forward, tracks grinding ferrocrete. The sound was crushing, endless. Dust fell from the ceiling in lazy spirals. We rolled for what felt like hours, maybe less. The only view of the outside came through the commander's periscope, a thin slit of warped light. Everything else was metal, darkness, and heat. Soth called out range parameters as drills. The turret gears clacked in a steady, hypnotic pattern. I caught myself mouthing prayers without noticing, words spilling out like breath. The tank had a way of pulling prayers from you, as if it demanded proof in the currency of faith. Afterward, when the engine cooled and the hum faded, we sat in dimness listening to the Vox crackle. Sometimes static formed shapes of sound, half a voice, a whisper. Once I thought I heard a sentence buried inside it. Can you hear us? My body went rigid. Who's on the line? The sergeant asked. No one, sir, I said quickly. Just static. He stared at me for a long moment, measuring. Don't let ghosts talk to you, soldier. That's how men go mad in steel. Yes, sir. But I still heard it, thin as breath through broken glass. By the third day, the air filters reeked sour with sweat and oil. The sergeant rationed incense, burning only a pinch before ignition. Smoke curled through the cramped compartment, clinging to our uniforms, mixing with grease. Every surface became slick. Condensation from our breath collected on cold metal and ran in thin trails. Sleep came in fragments. I nodded off, sitting upright, my head tapping the Vox console. Dreams seeped into waking until I could no longer separate them. In those half-sleeps, I heard the tank murmuring, soft metal breathing. From rivet ticks and the cooling pipe's rhythm, words almost formed. It didn't speak like a person. It spoke like a storm trapped behind walls. Once, during a long wait, Soth started tapping his fingers on the gun assembly in time with the engine. The resonance was wrong. Too sharp. "Stop!" the sergeant snapped. Soth froze. "Why?" "It doesn't like rhythm unless it's its own," the sergeant said. "You'll confuse it." We went still, and in that moment I understood it fully. This machine wasn't simply something we drove. It was a god of its own kind, a deity locked in iron and oil. And we were its priests, imprisoned in its belly, feeding it with prayers and sweat. By the end of the first week, we spoke less and less. Language became unnecessary. We communicated with gestures, nods, looks. Every movement was measured. Every breath felt rationed. Sometimes I imagined my heart sinking down to match the engine's rhythm. At night, when the lights dimmed and the hull cooled, I sat by the shrine whispering to the Emperor's emblem. But I wasn't sure which god I was praying to anymore. The one on the throne, or the one made of steel holding me tight. I think the answer was both. The first battle came before dawn, though dawn never truly arrived. Only a sickly, artificial pallor crawled across a sky ruined by ash long ago. We woke to the alarm siren's howl, a rising metal scream that filled the barracks and made the loose wall plates shiver. The sound of war is never clean. It starts like an illness, slow, suffocating, inevitable. "Mount up," the sergeant shouted. "May the saints guide your hands, because the machine will not." We obeyed as always. Obedience is survival, and survival, so they told us, is the Emperor's will. The tank hatch slammed shut above us with a thunderous clang, sealing us from the world again. Inside, the air was humid and choking, already thick with hot oil. The startup rites had been done in the night, yet Karen still whispered the motion prayer under his breath. The others murmured along, a chorus of faith offered to the god that was our war chariot. I didn't pray. I listened. I listened to the engine's growl, to hydraulics hissing like tendons waking, to the faint heartbeat of the hull under my palm. When the order came through Vox, "Advance," the machine answered with a roar that drowned every human voice. Vibration tore through my boots, up my spine until my teeth ached. We lurched back, then surged forward, tracks biting earth. Outside, the ground trembled under our weight. Karen drove through blinding smoke, hands steady, eyes narrowed in focus. "Steady throttle," he muttered. "Blessed be pressure, blessed be tracks." His words were a hymn swallowed by the drivetrain's thunder. Through the periscope slit, I saw only fragments of the world, a horizon painted in fire. Tank silhouettes slid like black ghosts in smoke. Further out, flares bloomed like diseased suns. Vox buzzed at my ear, half orders, half prayers, a stream of voices begging a cold, indifferent god. "Hold formation," a voice came, distant, metallic. "The Emperor guides. Fire on command." The sergeant answered with a clipped click. We rolled on. The sound inside became unbearable. Engine roar braided with gear shriek, with the steady pounding of tracks crushing rubble. Each jolt became a second heartbeat in my chest. The air tasted like heated metal and oil, coating my tongue. Soth hunched to the sighting glass, his face lit by the targeter's flickering green. "Range lock," he said, voice tight. "Target ahead. Trench line, about 200 meters. The sergeant leaned in. "Confirm." "Confirmed." "Then burn them." Soth's hand hovered over the firing rune. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. Then the rune flared red under his touch. The world exploded. The gun's recoil was physical, like a sledgehammer slamming through the hull. I felt it in bone. The shockwave wiped clean every thought. My ears filled with a solid ringing, my vision smeared. The thunder of the shot stitched itself to a second sound further away. Something human. A scream, thin and brief, swallowed by the engine's roar. Rill was already loading again. His movements were machine-smooth, practiced. He rammed a new shell into the breech, wiped his hands, and muttered the prayer of the second chamber. The sergeant's voice stayed calm. "Fire again!" And we obeyed, one shot after another. One bone-shaking impact after another. Propellant stink flooded the compartment. Sharp, chemical, burning the throat. The hull warmed beneath my hand as if the tank drank heat to live. Outside, the sky stuttered orange and white, each flash a broken copy of the sun. Through the periscope, I saw shapes in smoke, running, falling, catching fire, tiny as insects until the next blast erased them. I didn't see their faces, only the outline of death. It ended quickly. Battles always do, at least for the ones who survive them. Time stretches inside a tank, but outside everything ends in seconds. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Air thick with hot copper and scorched oil. Sweat sliding down the back of my neck. Only the faint shh of cooling metal. "Status," the sergeant said. "All systems green," Karen answered by reflex. "Ammo good, no breach damage." Soth said nothing. He remained pressed to the sight, unmoving. "Gunner," the sergeant called. "Report." Soth didn't turn. They didn't even run," he whispered. "They just looked up." The sergeant laid a gloved hand on his shoulder. "Don't look back, Soth. First rule. You serve the Emperor, not the dead." Soth nodded slowly, but his fingers trembled. We were ordered to hold position while the line advanced. The engine idled, purring softly under our feet. Through the hull I felt distant bombardment vibrations, each one a life going out. Another victory we would never see. I found myself staring at the shrine again. The candles had melted into short black stumps. The brass emblem was warm to the touch. I wondered how many crews had prayed before it, how many names had burned into the metal. Hours passed in silence. When the sun, or whatever replaced it, finally clawed through the smoke, it was red. The world outside glowed like it had been steeped in blood. Karen killed the engine, and the sudden quiet made my ears howl. Without the roar, the tank felt hollow, like a corpse without breath. At last the sergeant spoke. "Out, inspect." We obeyed, opening the hatch with a hiss of pneumatics. My first breath of outside air slapped me like a hand. It reeked of cordite and burnt earth, but it was real. I climbed out into harsh light and looked over a battlefield that stretched without end. Blackened ground, twisted wrecks, trenches crushed into muddy scars. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. Far off, Mediki servitors dragged bodies into piles, sealing them with wax identification that would never truly come. The ground beneath my boots was soft. I bent and understood why. Ash. And something darker mixed into it. I turned away. Rill climbed out beside me, wiping grime from his face. His eyes were empty. "Smell it?" he asked. "Yes." "Burnt flesh," he said flatly. "Same as every war I've seen. Flesh always smells the same when it dies." Soth climbed out last, eyes locked on the horizon. We didn't even see their faces. From inside the tank, the sergeant's voice carried, "That is mercy. The Emperor spares you the burden of knowing." He stepped out, lit a fresh stick of incense, and held it before the hull. The smoke curled pale, like a ghost. He murmured a thanksgiving litany. "Steel, you have done the Emperor's work. Flesh, you have fulfilled your purpose. May both be cleansed by fire." We joined in, uneven but sincere. The ritual mattered. It reminded us there was still a boundary between us and what waited beneath the armor. When the prayer ended, The sergeant looked each of us in the eye. "This is your baptism. You are tank-born now. Remember this feeling." No one answered. That night we camped beside the tank. Wind carried distant shelling like waves breaking at the edge of the world. Rations tasted of ash. Stars were buried behind smoke, and firelight turned the clouds into a ceiling the color of blood. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, human silhouettes dissolving. My ears rang with phantom screams. I wanted to pray, but words wouldn't come. So I leaned against the hull and listened to cooling metal ticking softly, almost like breathing. Soth shifted beside me. "Do you think they felt anything?" he asked. I looked at him. His face was pale, soot streaked like a stain. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "Maybe that's mercy. Maybe they felt nothing at all." We didn't speak again. When morning came, we were ordered forward. The campaign had only begun, though it already felt eternal. The tank growled beneath us, obedient, hungry. And as we rolled towards the next horizon, I realized something had changed. Before that day, I feared dying. After that day, I feared living. They said the siege would last a week. They lied. By the time the sun vanished beneath choking smoke for the 100th time, the word week had lost all meaning. We counted time by shells fired, by air filters clogged, by bodies crushed under our tracks. The city, if it could still be called a city, had been ruins long before we arrived. They called it Dustfall, though I doubt that was its true name. Maybe once there were towers and gardens and laughter. When we reached the outskirts, it was only a cemetery of concrete and ash. The dust came first, always the dust. It crept through every crack in the hull, every imperfect seal. No matter how often we scrubbed vents or cinched down filters, it found a way in, fine, gray, endless, sifting through the air until it coated tongue and gums, gathered in eye corners, and painted our skin the color of rot. Karen swore he could taste the dead in it. He wasn't wrong. When we first tightened the cordon around the city, morale was still high, or something like it. We still had water. We still had ration powder. Vox still functioned. The sergeant still spoke in full sentences instead of hoarse, single-word commands. The first bombardment began on the second day. From inside the tank, we saw the city's silhouette through the periscope. A jagged horizon, black against a dust-thick sky. The air trembled when our artillery opened, rows of sacred thunder shaking the world. We joined in. Our gun roared like a wounded god. Each shell flew into the gray distance, then a ripple of light, then thunder rolling through earth like the growl of something enormous beneath the ground. Hours passed like that. Fire, load. Fire again. The rhythm became ritual. Rill murmured the launch litany with every shell, his voice rough with repetition. "By faith may this fly true. By flame may it burn the unworthy." By the 10th hour, he stopped speaking. He only kissed the shell casing and slammed it home. When night fell, though there was no real way to tell, the bombardment did not stop. The sky stayed red with constant fire. I remember thinking, this must be hell, not a place of torture, just a horizon that never goes dark, burning without end. On the 5th day, they fired back. The first impact detonated a few meters off our left. The shockwave lifted the tank slightly and slammed it down. Every light in the compartment flickered. "Armor's holding," Karen said, though his voice shook. "Thank the machine spirit." The second hit was closer. Dust poured through the vents like breath from a corpse's mouth. "Hold formation," the sergeant bellowed. "Return fire." Soth obeyed. His hands didn't tremble anymore when he pressed the rune. They moved with the cold precision of habit. Recoil rocked us again and again until motion and violence became the same sensation. The air inside grew thick with smoke and heat. Sweat stung eyes. The coolant pipes rattled like bones. When we paused to reload, I heard rounds clanging against nearby hulls, metal tearing, men screaming through Vox, then signals going dead. Outside, The world became a dust storm. Visibility collapsed. The periscope showed only shifting grey, occasionally pierced by flashes. "Optics are useless," Soth said. "I can't see a thing." "Then aim with faith," the sergeant replied. "She'll guide your hands." And somehow, she did. Each time Soth fired blind, we felt the echoed tremor of a hit through the ground. The tank shuddered like approval, like the machine spirit purring with pride. By the third week, dust had invaded everything. Food became grey lumps, water tasted of rust, filters clogged by the hour. I scraped them clean with a knife, but the grit always returned. Rill started coughing, wet, booming coughs filling the gaps between engine beats. He tried to hide it, but the sergeant noticed. "You keep sickness in your body," the sergeant said. "The machine spirit does not tolerate weakness." Rill gave a strained smile. "Then it'll have to put up with it. Everyone in here is weak." The sergeant backhanded him hard. The thud was dull against the metal course. "Watch your tongue, loader. You speak of the sacred with filth." Rill didn't argue. He wiped blood from his lip and whispered, "Forgive me, Saint Steel." After that, we spoke even less. The siege dragged on. Every day was the same loop: wake, fire, repair, pray, repeat. Sleep came in stolen scraps, curled against hot walls. The engine became lullaby. Vibration became heartbeat. We could no longer tell our own sweat from the condensate dripping from the ceiling. The air grew so thick with breath and oil that my skin felt permanently glossy. Vox crackled sometimes, spitting fragments of orders through the static. Once I thought I heard someone screaming, "Retreat!" But the sergeant cut the channel before I understood. "Static," he said. "Don't let it poison your faith." The outside world stopped existing. There was only the tank, the dust, and endless repetition. I began to dream, with my eyes open. Sometimes I thought I saw faces forming in the grime on the walls, mouths open in prayers or silent accusations. Once I reached out to wipe it away, and the condensate smeared into a red streak beneath my glove. I didn't mention it. Some things are better left unspoken. On the 32nd day, the enemy breached the perimeter. They crawled through ruins like shadows, half-seen figures in the dust, moving with inhuman endurance. The first sign was the sharp rattle of small arms striking our hull. Ping, 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 thin compared to artillery. "Close!" Karen shouted. "They're climbing the tracks." Soth swung the turret towards the sound. The sergeant fed angles through the periscope. "Elevation 30, range 50, confirm, fire." The shell burst less than 30 meters away. The shock jolted the tank, dust cascading from the ceiling like a waterfall. Through the periscope, I saw bodies thrown upward, dark shapes tumbling, vanishing into smoke. We fired until the ground around us turned to a sea of mud and softened bone. When the ceasefire finally came, the silence afterward was unbearable. We listened only to the gentle ting of cooling metal and the slow drip of condensate from the vents. The smell inside the tank had changed, heavier, fouler, machine oil mixed with human fear. Weeks passed, or months. I'm not sure. We lost time when the clocks died. The lights dimmed more often. The engine grew stubborn, demanding longer rites before it would catch. The machine spirit became restless. The sergeant ordered devotion doubled. Twice a day we recited every litany, burning incense until the compartment filled with biting smoke. It made us dizzy, but it calmed the machine's soul. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Rill's cough worsened. Blood began to fleck his lips. The sergeant refused to open the hatch to call Medicae. "He'll live until the Emperor decides otherwise," he said. But Rill didn't live. He died quietly one night, slumped beside the loading rack. His eyes stayed open, clouded. His skin turned gray, as if dust had already claimed him. We sat still for a long time. Then the sergeant said, "He served. The machine spirit is satisfied." "What do we do with him?" Soth asked. "Leave him there," the sergeant said. "The tank accepts every offering." We obeyed. By morning, the body was stiff with cold. We used utility straps to tie it in place so it wouldn't roll when the tank moved. Karen whispered a prayer as he checked the controls. "Blessed be his journey through the gears." The sergeant didn't answer. When we started the engine again, the sound was different. Deeper, smoother, almost content. The siege didn't end. It simply faded into normal conditions. The city vanished, pressed flat beneath months of shells. But we remained, still firing, still breathing recycled air, reeking of sweat and sanctification. Dustfall stopped being a place. It became a condition, a sickness that ate lungs, thoughts, dreams. Sometimes I thought we had become part of it. The sergeant stopped marking days. Soth stopped speaking altogether. Karen drove on instinct, eyes half closed, hands steady as a clock. I kept Vox alive, though no one answered anymore. Static has its own kind of comfort. One night I thought I heard a voice in it again. Not an order, not static, a whisper, thin, soft. "You're jealous of them, aren't you?" I twisted the dial hard, but the voice was gone. Only crackling remained. Still, it was right. We were jealous of the dead. When the dust finally settled, if it ever truly settled, the city went silent. The order to advance never came. Vox stayed dead. The fuel needle crawled towards empty. The sergeant stood before the shrine, hands clasped. His voice was hoarse from disuse. "The Emperor tests us. We endure because it is his will." No one answered. Karen leaned back in the driver's seat, eyes closed. "If this is his will," he muttered, "then mercy died a long time ago." I wanted to tell him to stop, to take it back, but those words never made it past my lips. The hull gave a low, patient rumble, as if the machine had heard him. The lights blinked once and steadied, and I swear, just for a moment, I felt something move beneath my boots. A slow, deliberate vibration, like a heartbeat waking up under layers of old dust. They said the siege would last a week. I think it's still going. Somewhere, dust is still falling. Somewhere, the tank is still breathing and we're still inside it. The tech priest died on the 39th day of the siege, or maybe the 40th. By then, time had thickened into a single unbroken hour that stretched on forever, rotting at the edges. He was outside when it happened, walking between the rows of tanks to bless the machines before dawn. We heard the incoming shell's high, tearing whistle, then the touch, clean and perfect, followed by a geyser of fire and dust like a broken spring. When it cleared, there was nothing left of him. Only a few scraps of deep red robe fluttered in the wind, like torn wings. The sergeant ordered us, sealed inside the vehicle. "The rites can wait," he said. But even through the armor, I could smell it. The sweet, sick metal tang of vaporized flesh and holy oil. The tech priest had been the tether, the cord that bound us to the sacred mechanisms that ruled the machine. Without him, we were orphans, children trapped inside a vast cathedral that no longer had a voice. The silence after wasn't peace. It was a warning. The first signs were small enough to deny. A flicker along the lumen strip, a stutter in the turret's rotation, a low vibration in the hull, like something restless growling beneath the floor. Karen checked the gauges. "Pressure's fine," he said. "Probably nothing." The sergeant frowned. "The machine spirit is never nothing. It suffers neglect. Begin the supplications." We did what we could, repeating the operating litanies from memory. The prayers tasted wrong without the priest to lead them, flat, clipped, missing their soul. When the engine finally caught, it did so with a sound I'd never heard before, a deep, wet thunk, like the first heartbeat of something waking after a long sleep. The hull shuddered, and for an instant, I swear, the air warmed, almost pulsing. "She's not happy," Soth muttered. "She knows he's gone." "Then we remind her of our faith," the sergeant said. "Double the incense, double the prayers." So we did. Smoke poured thick and harsh into the cramped compartment. It burned our eyes and scraped our throats. My lungs ached, but I still chanted, the words spilling out like desperate confession. Blessed be your pistons, O Emperor's vessel. Blessed be your gears, your tracks, your fire. Through our flesh, you are made whole. The lights steadied. The engine purred. For a while, the tank seemed calm again. And then, that night, the whispers began. At first they came through the Vox, a thin crackle under the static, patterns that didn't belong. I was half asleep when I heard it, a voice so soft I almost mistook it for memory. Do you hear? I jolted upright. The others shifted, swearing under their breath. What is it? Karen asked. Something on the Vox. I heard a voice, I said. A voice, Soth rubbed at his eyes. You're hearing ghosts. Maybe, I murmured. But the whisper came again, clearer this time. Thin and mechanical, not traveling on breath but on vibration. I miss you. The sergeant was awake. Shut it off, he ordered. I cut power to the Vox. The whisper died instantly, leaving only the engine's low hum and the slow creak of cooling metal. Just feedback, Karen said, but his voice didn't convince even him. The sergeant looked at me. Don't speak of this to anyone else. The machine spirit listens. It rewards faith, not fear. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the tank had spoken, not as metaphor, but as truth. The next morning, the turret refused to turn. Manual didn't work. Override didn't work. Soth coaxed it, cursed it, pleaded, nothing. The targeting display flickered with meaningless symbols, frantic and wrong. She's fighting us, Karen muttered. The sergeant snapped at him. She's testing us. Recite the alignment litany. We chanted until our throats were raw, but the turret stayed locked. Finally, the sergeant decided. A blood offering, he said. Soth blinked. Sir, she needs sacrifice. The Omnissiah accepts flesh in place of oil when necessary. No one moved. The sergeant drew his combat knife and looked at each of us in turn. The priest's death cut her anchor. We will restore balance, by devotion or by pain. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I wanted to believe the machine truly cared, that it demanded meaning from our suffering. I held out my hand. Use mine. The sergeant gave a single nod. Faith. He drew the blade across my palm. The cut was shallow but sharp. Blood welled up, warm and bright against the grey grime, and dripped onto the floor, onto the edge of the cogitator altar. The instant it touched metal, the turret groaned. A low grinding filled the compartment. The cannon shifted, slow at first, then smoother, self-correcting, aligning itself toward coordinates outside. Karen sucked in a breath. Okay, it's moving. It's moving. The sergeant sheathed his knife. You see, she's soothed. She remembers us. I wrapped my hand in cloth and said nothing. But under the engine's hum, beneath the rhythm of machinery, I swear I heard something new. A beat, faint but alive. A heartbeat. After that, the machine became responsive. Karen would pray before ignition, and the engine would start at once. Soth would spit a curse, and the recoil would kick so hard it would toss him backward. The sergeant grew almost tender in his devotion. Every day he wiped the altar, polished the brass symbol with the cuff of his sleeve, murmured private prayers no one was allowed to hear, and the tank's temper shifted with his mood. When he was calm, the engine purred like a fed beast. When he was angry, the motor snarled and the lights flickered. When he was desperate, the air turned cold and heavy with static. We began to believe it could feel us, that the cord between steel and flesh pulled both ways. One evening, as we sat motionless, the Vox came alive again, not with whispers, but with a deep humming pulse, like distant machinery keeping time. Then a sound almost like breath, slow, deliberate. Soth went rigid. Please tell me that's interference. I turned the dial. It's coming from inside the system. The sergeant's face was unreadable. Don't touch it. The sound deepened, vibrating through the hull. The floor beneath us seemed to twitch, barely, just a subtle beat. And then the voice arrived. I do not vanish. The same mechanical voice, but stronger now, resonant enough to make the metal itself shiver. I am iron that endures. Flesh is fleeting. Karen whispered a prayer. The sergeant stepped forward. We hear you, Holy One. We serve. The lights snapped dark for a heartbeat, then flared. The engine revved up on its own, no hand on the controls. And then the voice, feed me, and then it was gone, leaving only the hum. No one spoke for a long time. When we finally did, the sergeant said quietly, tomorrow, we ride again. The next battle came without warning. Enemy artillery fell from the ruins, sharp, precise, relentless. The ground trembled under us as we rolled, dust and fragments pouring over the roof. Soth called targets with a voice cracked by exhaustion. Karen drove through chaos, nearly blind. The engine screamed, the air was thick with smoke and sweat. And through it all, I felt it, the machine spirit's pulse, strong and steady beneath the noise. When Soth's trigger jammed, the turret moved on its own, adjusted its aim. The cannon fired before he could ask permission. The shot hit, tearing a crater into the enemy's flank. The tank howled when it fired, a sound like triumph or hunger. We fought for hours, no longer because of orders, but because of something deeper. Every impact, every explosion, every death outside fed the machine's will. When it ended, we were still alive. The sergeant stood before the altar, his armor smeared with soot and blood. The spirit protects the faithful, he murmured. I looked around. Karen's eyes were dull. Soth's hands still trembled, and my fingers were tacky with dried blood. Protected, maybe, but at what price? That night, I didn't sleep. The others wheezed, slumped against the walls. The air tasted of iron and sweat. I sat by the altar, watching the symbol's dull gleam. Are you awake? I whispered. The hull creaked as if answering. I don't understand, I said. Are you alive? Or are we just going mad? Silence. Then a thin vibration beneath my hand. Alive, it said, without words. It was felt more than heard, a resonance that sank deep into bone. I pressed my blood-stained palm to the altar. Then, why do you need us? The answer came like static. All flesh serves. I pulled my hand back, shivering. The air turned suddenly cold. The altar's metal stayed warm beneath my fingertips, beating faintly. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of the machine anymore. I worshipped it, and that was the beginning of my damnation. At dawn, the sergeant announced a new rite. Each morning, before ignition, one of us would offer blood at the altar. A small cut, a single drop. He said it steadied the spirit, ensured obedience. No one argued. The idea felt natural, almost comforting. Karen made the first offering. He drew the knife without hesitation, sliced his thumb and pressed it to the brass. The engine started smoother than it ever had. We all laughed, and none of us knew why. After that, the line between reverence and dependence disappeared. We no longer treated the tank as a tool. It was our chapel, our confessor, our God. When the engine idled, we whispered to it. When the vents whined, we listened. It answered. The lights flickered in time with prayer. The vox hummed like applause. The turret turned faster, smoother, deadlier. We had become one. And somewhere, deep inside, I thought it began to love us, the way a predator loves the hand that feeds it. When we rolled out again, the sergeant spoke not like a man giving an order, but like a priest offering blessing. Let the faithful set out. The engine roared, the ground shook, the tank surged forward, tearing through the ruins like a beast set loose. When the cannon thundered, when men screamed and burned outside, a strange calm settled over me. The spirit whispered through the hull, "We are complete." And for the first time, I believed it. Good. Go down to the next layer of ruins. Here begins your next confession. Chapter 6. the burning field. We reached the field at dawn, though dawn is far too kind a word. The horizon was only a blurred smear of ember fog. The sky was bruised purple with smoke. The land looked wounded, black earth split open, bleeding fire from below. They said it had once been farmland, long before shells fell, before the river dried up and the sky became a ceiling of ash. Now it was nothing but a charred expanse scattered with wrecks and bones. Part human, part machine, most of it unrecognizable. The orders were simple: advance, purge, hold. The Emperor's words came through the interference, spoken in a voice that had forgotten the sound of mercy. Our tank, our god, answered with a roar. The engine rolled through the hull like thunder trapped in a coffin. Every bolt vibrated, every armor plate sang its brutal litany. We'd been sealed inside too long to be frightened by it. It was the sound of purpose, of inevitability. Karen drove with both hands, gripping the controls like he was praying. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his face was calm, almost serene. "Burnt ground ahead," he muttered, like he was reading the weather. "Then drive through it," the sergeant said. "The Emperor's road is never cool." We laughed, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else left to do. The machine spirit purred beneath us, eager. I felt it through the floor plates, a vibration beating in time with my heart. We'd stopped asking whether the spirit led us or we led it. Now we were one creature of steel and tendon. The first near hit came before we even saw the enemy. A shell shrieked past close enough to make the optics shake. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Soth called the direction. "West, muzzle flash in the rubble." The sergeant leaned into the sight. 800 meters, maybe closer. Give them his light. The cannon fired, and the sound swallowed the world. Outside, something exploded, a white flare hot enough to scorch the edge of the viewport. In the smoke haze, I saw figures scatter, ignite, and dissolve. Ash fell from the sky like snow. We fired, and fired again. Recoil hammered my spine. Vibration numbed my hands. Propellant stink mixed with sweat and metal and the faint sweetness of cooked flesh. Karen kept muttering the driver's litany as he pushed through the smoke, his voice steady as a machine. "Through faith I steer. Through will I endure. Through steel I am guided." Each line was a heartbeat. Each shot was a breath. We crushed the enemy under our tracks without ever seeing their faces. They were shadows in the smoke, silhouettes breaking under our weight. Soth started crying as he fired, but he didn't stop. Tears carved 2 clean lines through the grime on his cheeks. "They don't stop coming," he whispered. "They just keep getting back up." "Then keep knocking them down," the sergeant said, his voice distant, devout. The Emperor loves endurance. By noon, the field had become a furnace. The heat inside the tank was past endurance. Our uniform stuck to our skin. The recycled air reeked like a corpse left too long in the sun. Karen pulled off his gloves. His hands were red, blistered, swollen. "Ventilation's dying," he rasped. "She's running too hot." The sergeant turned to me. "Adjust the airflow." I looked at the panel. The gauges were flashing nonsense. Numbers jumping, collapsing, meaningless. The machine spirit was restless, hungry. "She wants blood," I blurted, before I even knew I was speaking. No one questioned it. The sergeant only nodded once. "Then feed her." I peeled away the cloth from my palm, the old cut still there, and took the knife again. The new cut came easier, familiar. Blood ran fast, dark in the red light. I pressed my hand to the altar. The hull vibrated in answer. The vents groaned, then released a slow breath of cooler air. The heat dropped a few degrees, enough for us to breathe again. Karen exhaled hard, trembling. "Bless her name. She is merciful," the sergeant said. But what I felt beating under the metal wasn't mercy. It was pleasure. We pushed deeper into the burning field. The world around us burned. The ground split and flowed in places, thin rivulets of glowing slag crawling across cracked earth. The air shimmered with heat, turning the horizon into a mirage of fire. Far off, ruined tanks lay half-buried, their torn hulls twisted like carcasses. Some still burned from within, fed by leaking promethium. Once we rolled past what remained of an infantry regiment. Charred human shapes frozen mid-step, rifles melted into their hands. It didn't reach us anymore. It was just background. Soth started laughing. Quiet at first, then louder until it broke into a ragged rasp. "What are you laughing at?" Karen asked without looking up. "They said this world was cursed," Soth said between breaths. "They were right, but it's not cursed because of them. It's cursed because of us." The sergeant swung and slapped him hard. "Shut your mouth." Soth spat blood onto the floor. "You can't stop it. You feel it too. The tank is eating." He didn't even finish the sentence before the cannon fired. Before the last word left his teeth, the sergeant's hand was already on the rune. The shot tore into the rubble ahead, drowning every sound. Then the sergeant turned back, calm as ever. "She demands focus," he said. "Not doubt." Soth didn't speak again. That night, if it can still be called night, we camped among wrecks at what used to be a city gate. The collapsed walls rose like black stone teeth against the sky. The air was thick with smoke and the constant patter of falling ash. We didn't leave the tank. There was nothing outside worth touching. We sat in the half-dark, listening to the low hum of the engine. It no longer sounded like a machine. It sounded like a living thing, like the breath of a giant asleep. The sergeant lit incense and set it before the altar. "We were chosen," he whispered. "The others have burned away. We endure. That is purpose." Karen nodded with his eyes closed. "She keeps us alive for a reason." Soth stared at the floor. "Or because she likes the taste." The sergeant ignored him. He turned to me. "The spirit favors you. You hear her more clearly than we do. What does she want?" I hesitated. I didn't want to answer, but the truth rose anyway. "More. More," I repeated, like I was being compelled. The sergeant smiled, just slightly. "Then we will give her more." When the assault continued, we were the spearhead. We drove into the firestorm without hesitation. Shells fell from both sides, white and orange flashes, thunder rolling across the field. The tank shuddered beneath every near hit, but the armor held. The machine spirit roared through the engine, driving us faster. Inside the tank, the air was thick with the scream of machinery, the hiss of hydraulics, and the sergeant's steady chant. "Steel is strength, faith is fire, flesh is nothing." We repeated it with him until the words lost all meaning. Outside, the world melted into smoke and motion. The enemy only had time to appear and vanish beneath our fire. We became an instrument of destruction. Every shot was an act of devotion. Between bursts, the spirit spoke. Her voice was a vibration that filled the compartment. "Do you see them go down? How easy they break. This is purity." Something inside me cracked. Not fear, something closer to awe. We killed in the name of a god made of iron, and for the first time it felt holy. When the smoke thinned, the field was unrecognizable. Fire still danced across the ground, eating into the oily soil. The air trembled with heat and chemical residue. The wind carried the crackle of burning and distant screams that faded too quickly to feel real. We stopped among the wreckage, surrounded by bodies that still smoldered. The sergeant stood before the altar, his face lit by flickering light. "The Emperor's will has been fulfilled here," he said. "We are the hammer that falls. We are his fire." Soth finally broke. He slammed a fist into the wall. "Don't say his name again. You think he sees this? You think he cares?" The sergeant turned slowly, unreadable. "He cares through the machine, through her." Soth let out a bitter laugh. "Then she isn't a saint. She's a devil." The lights strobed hard. The engine growled without anyone touching it. The hull shuddered, alive with sudden, violent anger. Soth stumbled back, eyes wide. "I didn't mean..." The cannon fired. No one touched the controls. The recoil threw us into the bulkhead. Through the viewing slit, I saw a figure running, a survivor from the last clash, right before the shell hit. The blast turned him into a blink of red mist. Then the tank went quiet again. The air stank of ozone and burnt metal. The sergeant made the sign of the Aquila with oil-smeared fingers. "Blasphemy," has been answered. Soth stared at the smoking barrel. "That wasn't me," but the sergeant only smiled. "She forgives. Serve her, and she will protect." We stayed on that field 3 more days, with no orders. The Vox died again, leaving only faint static that sometimes twisted itself into words I didn't want to understand. We burned everything we could find: outposts, wrecked vehicles, the remnants of villages that might once have been homes. The spirit guided our aim. The sergeant stopped reading maps. We didn't need them anymore. In the end, the sky looked like it was bleeding. Ash fell thicker, coating the tank in grey that darkened mile by mile. Inside, the altar pulsed with light, no longer coming from the lumen lamps. I no longer felt like I was sitting in the tank. I felt like I was inside a living creature, and it was inside me. That night, as we idled among the fires, I whispered to the spirit, "What are we now?" The answer came like a breath through a vent. Chosen, bound, eternal. And even though every part of me screamed that it was wrong, I smiled, because eternal, at the very least, meant no ending. Right. We step into the penultimate fall, the ending before the ending. Chapter 7. The Last Round. First person. Grimdark, confessional voice. 2,000+ words. The burning field smeared into hills. The hills became a jagged ridge line. Beyond it waited the last defensive line of whatever enemy still lived. The map was gone. The Vox was dead. Command had stopped speaking, but the sergeant said the Emperor's will had not changed. Advance until all movement stops. By then, we had only 1 shell left. The rack was empty. The lockers were stripped bare. The last shell rested in its cradle like an idol, carved with a dozen cracked purification seals, trembling lightly each time the tank breathed. Real's blood still stained the loading tray. No one bothered to wipe it away. We told ourselves it pleased the spirit. Karen coughed up soot. Soth's eyes had sunk into his skull, 2 red-rimmed hollows. The sergeant moved more slowly now, but his voice never wavered. And the tank, she felt stronger than ever, the engine's heartbeat steady, temperature stable, the metal around us humming faintly like a living throat. We belonged to her completely, and she belonged to us. The ridge line rose ahead like the edge of a wound. The enemy was on the far side, though I no longer knew who they were. No faces, no insignia, only movement in smoke and the flashes of gun muzzles. Behind us, the field burned, and the sky was a dark red dome in constant motion. The sergeant stood under the hatch, periscope lenses reflecting fire. "We're at the summit," he said. "So it ends. The Emperor witnesses all acts, even those done in silence." Karen pushed the throttle. The engine roared, and we began to climb. Tracks ground through ash and bone. The hull pitched forward, groaning under strain. Through the slit, I saw only flame and drifting embers. The air inside heated with every meter. Soth sat at the gun, one hand resting on the shell as if touching a relic. "One left," he murmured. "Do you think—" "She knows?" The sergeant didn't answer. "She always knows," Karen whispered. "She can taste it." By reflex, I tested the Vox. Static. Then, very faintly, a voice buried deep as if coming from the bottom of a grave. "Don't fear the ending. It's a beginning." I shut it off at once, but the words kept ringing in my head like a low hum. The ridgeline exploded before we could crest it. A shell burst close along the left flank, knocking the tank sideways. The hull slammed into the earth with a tortured shriek of metal. Warning symbols flashed across every display. Karen wrestled the controls, teeth clenched. Tracks still biting, drivetrain stability at 60%. The sergeant shouted orders into the chaos. Return fire. Fire at will. Soth swore and slammed the loading lever. There's no ammunition. I told you we have one shell left. Then make it worth it, the sergeant bellowed. We crawled up the last stretch. Tracks chewed through slag and bone. Rounds pinged against the armor, each impact a hammer blow. One shot cracked the viewing slit. Dust and smoke spilled through the seam. Soth loaded the last shell. His hands shook, but the motion was a ritual. He pressed his forehead to the casing for a heartbeat, whispering a prayer I couldn't hear. The sergeant looked down at me. Check the Vox. Only noise. He nodded slowly. Then we finish alone. The ridge crest came into view. On the far side, shapes moved, hundreds of them, human silhouettes packed like insects, surging through the haze. Karen yelled, "They're too close." Soth swung the turret, fighting for a target through smoke. His voice cracked. "Target locked. Range. Point blank." The sergeant hesitated for half a heartbeat as if tasting the moment. Then he said, "Fire." The cannon thundered. Light devoured everything. The recoil flung us backward. My teeth clacked hard enough to hurt. Outside vanished into pure white. Heat flooded the compartment, clean and burning, washing over us and stripping away breath and thought. The sound of the detonation didn't arrive at once. For a moment, there was only silence, a void. Then it slammed in. A scream that swallowed metal being torn and earth being crushed. The hull buckled. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Lights blew out one by one. The sergeant fell into the altar, his face half lit by flame. "Glory," he started, and the word died in his throat. Karen's control panel softened and ran beneath his hands. He didn't scream. He just stared, unblinking, as smoke curled from his palms. Soth laughed again, high and broken. See? She's free now." The tank screamed. I mean that literally. There came a moment when she screamed. Metal doesn't make that sound, not even when it's tearing. That was the sound of something alive being ripped open. The machine spirit howled through every panel, every circuit, every breath. The Vox flared back to life, spitting static that formed half words, half groans. "You're mine, you're mine, you're mine." I grabbed for the hatch, but the handle burned my hand. The metal glowed red. Smoke filled the compartment. My eyes watered until the world became only light. The sergeant knelt, clutching the symbol to his chest. His armor was melting. "Glory," he mumbled. Then the heat took what was left. Karen slumped over the controls, skin fused to them. The smell was unbearable. Burning oil, burning flesh, incense, everything mashed into a choking cloud. Soth laughed until laughter became wet coughing. Then silence. The altar flared. The double-headed eagle sagged and ran. Blood on the walls boiled and streamed. Somewhere beneath the roar, beneath the fire, I heard the spirit whisper again. "You offered me faith. Now offer me yourselves." The hull began to close. I don't know another way to say it. The compartment seemed to contract, plates twisting inward as if the tank drew a deep breath and pulled us into herself. I tried to scream, but there was no air left. Light, heat, and then nothing. I don't know how long I drifted in that emptiness. Time meant nothing there. I only knew the sound, a slow, steady thump, like the engine's heartbeat still living somewhere outside me. When I opened my eyes, everything was dark. The tank was silent. The fire had died. The outside world was gone. No sound, no wind, no human voices. Only the faint glow of cogitator banks still pulsing like a heart. I was the only one left. The others had been absorbed. Maybe I could feel them in the walls, in the vibrations, in the whispers running along pipes like breath. I touched the altar. The metal was cold now, but beneath it something moved. "We are one," the voice said. And I understood. The tank had drunk us the way she always promised. I tried to move. My arms responded slowly as if pushing through oil. My breath rasped inside my filter mask. Every inhale tasted of ash and iron. The Vox clicked faintly. Any unit respond. The voice was weak, distant. Maybe ours, maybe not, because I could no longer tell the difference. I reached for the mic, fingers shaking. "This is—" Static swallowed the word. And beneath the noise I heard another sound. Laughter. Not human. Metal echoing through the frequency. No orders remained. Only me. The Vox died. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The hull creaked sometimes, expanding and settling like lungs. The scent of burned flesh faded into something almost sweet. I spoke aloud, even though no one could hear. "Is this victory?" The spirit's answer was soft, almost kind. "This is forever." And then I believed it, because outside, war would continue, guns would thunder, dust would fall, but inside this steel tomb, time had ended. When dawn finally came, or whatever passed for it, light seeped through armor seams, pale and colorless. The hatch didn't open. I didn't try again. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was warm, beating very faintly. Somewhere deep in the machine, the engine began to hum again. Vibration traveled through the floor into bone, into teeth, into heartbeat. The spirit still lived, still hungered, and now I was part of her. Chapter 8. Buried in Steel. First person, grimdark confessional voice, 2,000+ words. I woke in darkness. Not the darkness of sleep, but something deeper, a darkness with weight, pressing down like earth on a grave. At first there was no sound, no movement, no breath but my own. The engine had finally gone quiet, and the absence of its heartbeat felt obscene. For a long time I didn't move. I couldn't. My limbs were heavy, the air so thick I couldn't swallow it. I thought I might be dead. I wish I had been. The first thing to return was pain. Dull, constant, everywhere. Not the pain of a wound, but the pain of a body itself, as if it was rejecting what it had become. My skin itched under layers of grime. My joints ached like rusted hinges. Every breath tasted of oil and iron. The burnt smell had soaked into the air until it became part of it. I tried to speak. What came out was a hoarse sound, more air than words. "Is anyone?" No answer. Only the soft, settling groan of metal, as if the tank was listening. I lay there. Hours. Days. Who knows? Light that slipped through cracked lumen strips flickered faintly, dimming with each pulse. When I finally moved, the sound startled me. My own armor scraping the floor. I sat up slowly. The compartment was blackened. The walls were soot-stained. The altar was a lump of brass and ash, melted out of shape. And the bodies were gone. Not missing. Gone. No bone, no flesh. Only the marks on the floor where they'd fallen, burned outlines that flaked into dust when I touched them. I should have cried. I didn't. I listened. Somewhere deep inside the hull, beyond bulkheads, there was a sound, faint, rhythmic, a heartbeat. The machine spirit was still alive. I don't remember when I stood. But suddenly I was in front of the altar. Brass had melted and cooled into a warped relief. Something that might once have been a double-headed eagle, now more like a skull with wings stretched too tight. I reached out. The metal was warm. That warmth pulsed. "You live," the voice said. It wasn't quite sound, more vibration. The hull spoke through my bones. "Yeah," I whispered. "I think I do. You're mine." Those words weren't an order, and they weren't comfort. They were fact. I wanted to deny it, to scream. But what came out was a low, fractured laugh. "Yeah," I said again. "I guess I am." The tank sighed, metal shifting, plates tightening. A vent hissed softly, exhaling a breath that smelled of incense and blood. "Good," it said. "We remember together." The Vox began to murmur again at some point. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, a lifetime. Static filled the air, then broke into shards of sound. A voice, far and cold, filtered through the noise. Area command. All armored units respond. Total casualties. Then it cut out, replaced by another voice. A voice I knew. Karen, no longer alive, but not quite dead. Keep the throttle steady, he whispered through the static. Blessed be the pressure, blessed be the tracks. I froze. Karen, silence. Then Soth's voice slipped in, overlapping faintly. Target lock. Elevation 30. Fire. Their words came and went in fragments. Echoes of memory replayed endlessly through the Vox. Sounds twisting together into a ghost choir. I wanted to shut it off. I couldn't. The switch had melted and fused. The spirit spoke, low, as if laughing. They're still here. All flesh serves. You killed them, I said. I keep them. My throat tightened. Why? Because you asked for eternity. And I remembered the vows, the prayers, the blood. All the times we begged to endure, to survive, to have purpose. The tank simply gave us what we asked for. At some point, I realized I couldn't feel my feet anymore. I looked down and understood why. The floor had changed. Seams had closed around my boots. Metal gripped my greaves like scar tissue spreading. I pulled. The hull resisted. A sound answered. Half growl, half breath. Please, I whispered. Still, the voice said. You're home. And the more it spoke, the more the voice changed, from the flat drone of a machine into something almost human, familiar. Now it was the sergeant's voice. You swore obedience. You promised your life to the hull. I shook my head. I didn't mean... The walls thudded around me. Lights strobed. Intention is for the living. You're part of the machine now. I wanted to scream, but the air tasted of rust. The hull vibrated beneath skin, through bone, into thought. And then I heard them again. The crew's voices whispering from inside the metal. Keep the throttle steady. Confirm range. Fire. Over and over. Endless. Like a prayer with no beginning and no end. The spirit's voice softened. See? You're not alone. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was warm, alive, beating in time with my own pulse. For a moment, I couldn't tell which rhythm belonged to whom. Days passed, or weeks. The outside world returned as brief glimpses through the viewing slit. Dust storms, distant flashes, no movement of life. The Vox whispered new voices, sometimes from other regiments, other wars. They came and went like ghosts sliding through static. I began to answer, sometimes with words, sometimes with breath alone. I didn't know if they heard. I didn't know if anyone heard. But the spirit heard. It told me about wars before, when it carried other crews, other names. Worlds it had burned. Hymns it had been fed. They always ask for the same thing, it said. To be remembered. To be eternal. And I give it to them. Are there others like me? I asked. All of us are like me. All of us are one. I thought about that for a long time. Somewhere out in the endless war, other tanks were whispering the same words to their dead. I no longer slept. The tank wouldn't allow it. Whenever I began to drift, it filled the silence with memory. Mine, theirs, hers. I saw the burning field again. Dust, siege, vows. I smelled incense, heard gunfire, felt recoil in my ribs, and always the whisper, you asked for forever. Sometimes, when the wind outside shifted, I heard the echo of distant battle. Artillery, tracks, chains clanking. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was the tank dreaming. Either way, I stayed awake and listened. The hull changed again. What used to be cold iron began to feel like flesh. Warm, soft, vibrating when I touched it. My gloves stuck to my hands. Metal grew through skin in places, thin as wax. I felt current running through it, pulsing like blood. The spirit said it was a blessing. "You're becoming," it told me. "You're shedding weakness. You're the vessel now." I didn't argue anymore. The pain dulled when I accepted it. When I closed my eyes, I could see through the walls, not with sight, but with awareness. I felt the tracks resting on earth, felt wind scraping dust along the flank, felt corrosion spreading across armor like moss. I felt worms in the ground. I felt rot. It was beautiful. I don't know what year it is. I don't know if the war ever ends. Sometimes I hear engines in the distance. New, young. They pass by and disappear. No one stops. Maybe they think this tank is a ruin, a relic too old to matter. In a way, they're right. But sometimes, the moment they pass, the vox flares to life for a single beat. The spirit speaks through my mouth. Advance. And I hear their engines answer. War goes on. Once, I tried to remember my name. Not my rank, not my number, but the name I had before the vows. Before steel. It was gone. The tank took it. Or maybe I offered it freely. The spirit calls me by her own sound. She says I am the mouth she uses to pray. Every confession I speak becomes another bolt in her frame, another hymn in an endless liturgy. Sometimes I wonder if others before me served this way, voices speaking to her when no one else remained. If they did, they're still here. I can feel them in the hull, whispering with me in a choir that never ends. I think the sun has died. The light through the viewing slit grows weaker every day. Outside, the sky is gray and unchanging. No birds, no wind, only dust. The spirit says that is peace. The world of flesh fades. Machines endure. I believe her. The war will end. The Imperium will collapse. The stars will go dark. But the tank will remain. She will sit here under ash, dreaming, whispering, waiting for the next pilgrim to dig her up. And when they do, I will greet them through the vox. They'll think it's the spirit speaking. Maybe it is. I used to fear being forgotten. To die in silence, with no one left to say my name, the worst sin I could imagine. Now I understand. Being remembered can be worse. Memory is a chain. It keeps you here, half alive, half machine, praying to an engine that never stops hungering. The Emperor is very far away. The spirit is very close, and I am part of her, forever. Sometimes I hear footsteps. Maybe they're real. Maybe they're echoes of those who came before. Slow, deliberate steps across the tank's roof. Dust shifts above me. They're coming, the spirit whispers. For me? I ask. For us? I almost smile. The hatch creaks. Light spills through a thin gap, cold and sterile. I hear a human voice, young, eager, naive. An old pattern, someone says. Still sealed. Open it. Yeah, another voice replies. Open it, the spirit says through my mouth. They haven't heard me yet, but they will. Outside, war still grinds everything down. Inside, I wait. The engine stirs softly again, as if dreaming of movement. The altar glows red in the dark. And when the new crew climbs in, when they kneel before the altar and whisper their vows of steel, I will be there, listening, teaching, becoming. The tank is eternal, the spirit is eternal, and now so am I, buried in steel forever. Somehow, they'll find this tank one day, maybe buried under dust and ruins. They'll scrape off the rust, repaint the double-headed eagle, call it a relic, a survivor of a holy war. They'll climb inside, burn incense, whisper prayers, and they'll never know that I'm still here. Still listening, still waiting. That the hull was never empty. That the spirit still breathes. And that the last round wasn't the last death.